Well, good morning, everybody. Nice to have you aboard with us. And we're starting a new item here for TAZ Networks where we're going to be doing and trying to be doing a monthly webinar for clients, guests, those that we invite. And so this month, one of the most requested things that we have asked is regarding cybersecurity. And so we thought we'd just do a webinar to bring you up to date on cybersecurity and maybe some things to keep in mind or things that you haven't thought about. And so really just emphasizing that it's more than just a firewall and what all of us, every business owner should keep in mind. Just a couple of housekeeping items. As you note here in our messages box, Heather is on board as well, and she'll be interacting with us. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the messages area. We'll ask Heather for those questions as we go along and definitely get that back and forth for you. We're also recording this webinar for future reference, so if you need to pass it on to someone else, we'll put it up there. Heather will be sending out the slides and the notes as well. So appreciate everybody joining. Let's get started. So just to let you know who I am, if you haven't met me before, I am Tavis Patterson. I'm the president of TAZ Networks. Started TAZ Networks in 2003 in my basement. Was one of those entrepreneurs that didn't know exactly what he was doing and started up. But it's been a nice ride ever since. And so we've got a good staff, a good team here at TAZ Networks. Me personally, I have a network engineer background. For those of you that don't know, I worked previously for CompuWare, what used to be CompuWare Professional Services, and it's kind of split a couple times now. But worked on contracts as large as General Motors. And so, I've seen a lot of different security incidents from the enterprise side of things, how, best to operate in that, and then going all the way down to being the family support for the family restaurant with two PCs, So I've seen all types of items, all types of security sizes and incidents in our 15 years here at TAZ Networks. And so we've got some good breadth of what we need to do to make sure that we're all secure moving forward. So happy to have you with us. Well, cybersecurity is more than just a firewall. Those are firewalls, and TAZ Networks uses sonic wall firewalls. We have from the beginning. We've always found that sonic wall firewalls are very easy to use, very secure, excellent company with a reasonable price point for small to medium-sized businesses. But firewalls are not cybersecurity by itself, right? It is a piece of the puzzle. And so the misconception that many people have is that you're secure if you simply have a firewall sitting off in that dark, dusty closet with all of your computers and servers. It's just not the case. It takes really more than that. You have to really investigate and make sure that you're secure from the inside and the outside. So we'll talk a little bit about those things. But just keep in mind that you need a firewall, but it's a lot more than just a firewall. And so it's very important to have that perspective, right, of what you're doing. And, if we're handling your IT, we're going to be looking at that firewall, but there are some things, frankly, that are out of the control of the IT department, really. And so you want to keep that in mind from a business owner or key contact perspective of making sure that you are secure as an organization. So what really is cybersecurity then? If it's not just the firewall, what is it? Well, it's really the state of being protected against criminal or unauthorized use of electronic data. And so that can include best practices, it can include technologies, it can include standards that you have in place. It's definitely not just your firewall. So you want to make sure that you put this proactive approach in place. And it's something that if you haven't thought about cybersecurity recently, make sure you bring it up maybe in a board meeting, a leadership meeting, department meeting, whatever the case is, to just review some items. Some people's eyes will probably gloss over, but it's really important to get buy-in from all key individuals to make sure that you're protected. Now, why is it so important? Well, it's so important because the cybercrime has just grown immensely. It was estimated to be about $500 billion in 2015. But now they're saying in 2019, it could be $2 trillion. And so what does that mean? That means that those bad guys have a lot of money. They have a lot of resources, and they're very organized. A lot of times when we think of cybercrime, we think of the one hacker in the basement, staying there. That is not the case. These are organized criminal units that are strategically attacking small, medium, large-sized businesses. And so they will, target whoever they can get into. Doesn't matter. And frankly, sometimes small and medium-sized businesses are the least secure, so it's easy targets for them. And you might think, well, it's not something that, hey, they'll ever worry about me. Yeah, they'll worry about you. They'll hit you because if you have any money in your bank account, they'll go after it. So it's not just for the big guys, and that's what we have to keep in mind. The misconception too, when crypto viruses came out, is that recently we've heard a lot in investing channels about Bitcoin as well. And so we don't want to get confused. Cybersecurity is not Bitcoin. It's not cryptocurrencies or blockchains, if you've heard those terminologies recently in the news. Really, the cybersecurity standpoint is protecting against data loss from criminals. Where these get confused and where the terminology got confused is these crypto viruses were such named because they would use cryptocurrency as payment, which is a Bitcoin, But now some of these, for instance, Bitcoin is so expensive that it's just out of touch for most people. But it's different, so we want to keep that in mind. The reason they use that is that those cryptocurrencies were used because there's no name to who's getting that information, and so it was very easy for criminal elements to be paid in that regard. So just keep in mind that cybersecurity is totally different. Just a little bit of a tangent, but just a clarification. When we say people will mistakenly say you've been cryptoed, that's not the currency, right? And that's not exactly what we're talking about here. That's one piece, but it's not everything. So just a little clarification there. So let's break it down. We're going to break it down to 3 different areas that you need to be concerned with as an owner or key contact in your company. Really, what is it more than just a firewall? Well, the 3 areas. 1 is the human element. 2 are the procedures that you need to have in place. And 3 are the technologies. So we'll focus on each of these areas and maybe shed a little light on each area. And hopefully, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in. And we'll definitely kind of take each one of them because they're very different in each regard, more than just a firewall. So let's start with the first one. So here is the human side. Yeah, that's not a picture of me, although I'm sure people think it is. You don't have to be a geek to get cybersecurity. Frankly, it's better if you're not. We want to make sure that everyone understands cybersecurity. Frankly, the person at the front desk of your employee or your department, your business, can have just a big effect on cybersecurity as the IT person. So we have to train our people. We have to make sure that everyone is trained. Why? Because employees are the weakest link in network security, not your firewall. So keep that in mind, that we have to train our employees, because it really can be the difference between data loss, money loss, and frankly a business staying in business or out of business. For any of us that are business owners, we know we rely on our employees, and so we have to have employees that are well trained and up to speed with everything that comes from cybersecurity. So what are some things that we can keep in mind when it comes to cybersecurity? Well, the training side of things, a company that we've partnered with is called KnowBe4. And so really it's a security awareness training. There are many of these that have populated recently, but it's definitely something that you want to look into if you've not already established a relationship. We have a relationship with KnowBe4. If you're interested, let us know. But essentially, what do? Well, they do security awareness training, so they can do webinars, they can do actual web type training, but then they also do testing. So do your people know the difference between maybe a good link or a bad link in an email? If they get something sent to them, will it really be clicked on and acted upon? And that's what we talk about when we talk about phishing, right? Here are phishing items where people are really throwing their hook and line into the water, into your email, and seeing whether or not they can get a bite, right? Will you click on that? Maybe will you go to the next link and do something different? And so KnowBe4 sends out those sample emails. They'll actually see if your people click on something that could possibly contain a virus. And then if they do, they'll send them to a link that says you were just caught in a phishing environment. And so here's how to avoid that in the future. So simple things, for instance, like hovering above a link, right? If we see something that's not a .com, it's a .it or a .sh or something that is foreign, do your employees know not to click on that if they don't know where it's from or who it's coming from? The old invoice analogy is very appropriate here, where people will just send an attachment that says, here's your invoice. And they wonder, well, what is it? They open it up. Even maybe an antivirus or something else opens up and says, hey, are you sure you want to open this? They click right on through. They don't read it. They say yes. And now instantly, that's how most people get those viruses that encrypt data. Now your data is lost, and we have to go back to a restore of data. 9 times out of 10, that's what we see with data loss, is that. So data loss could be just as small as the last backup. But you think about the time and effort that it takes to restore that. And if you have a large environment, 20, 30, 40, 50 employees, and you go back to the last backup of maybe 4 to 5 hours, maybe it's 6 or 7 hours, maybe it's the end of the day, then you really see that those hours have multiplied, that time and money is multiplied, and you've wasted that day of productivity. So it can be a very big thing. KnowBe4 is a good company, and for a relatively small price, they will do that security training. One of the things that's interesting, and one of the things that, would your employees know, is if they saw a USB stick on the ground, right? and it was labeled payroll. Maybe somebody just put it outside the door, right, or in the parking lot. They don't have access to your building, but they put it out there. Would they just stick it into their computer, thinking that you dropped it as the point of contact or the controller dropped it, and now they've got access into your machine? It starts up and puts a virus or puts maybe a keylogger where they're getting passwords in. That's the type of thing that KnowBe4 will help in really training users to do. So some things to think about, as to what we really could do to help train some of our folks. Well, passwords are a big thing, right? And so that's the human side of things. The human in all of us hate passwords. We really do. And we think about it. We try, and we have different variances of passwords out there with maybe numbers. We add a 1, and then next time we change it to 2 and a 3. But we need to do better with our passwords. Some instances of things to keep in mind. Passphrases are always better, right? So if you can remember a passphrase, you should remember them better than just a password. But maybe a passphrase has multiple words, lowercase, uppercase characters that you can put together. A couple other things that I put in here. Is your banking password the only password like it? So we know there's a lot of online banking that is done. In our industry, we use it at TAZ Networks, right? Our bank, we pay our bills through our online banking. But if you have the same password as your administrator password, as your password, and it's very similar or the same, that just makes it easy if a cloud site that you use, maybe a merchant that you use, hacks that site. Now they have half the key, right? They have that password that you're using for your banking website, and all they need really is your login information, which is probably easier to get than you think. So just keep that in mind. Do you change passwords? How often? If you don't have a change password policy in place, you are 90% more susceptible to getting hacked. That's just a fact. So you need to change passwords, and they need to be complex. One thing that we're really starting to use more and more here, and we're recommending to our clients, is to use two-factor authentication. The big enterprise companies use them tremendously, use them a lot, but it's something that really needs to be done. And so, for instance, a company that we've partnered with in Ann Arbor is called Duo. And you also see two-factor authentication from Google and Microsoft, where you need to log in. Step one there is you log in, but really to gain access, you have to enter in a token or enter in a number or a key phrase that the two-factor authentication application uses. And then that verifies you are who you are. So even if someone gains your email, gains your password, they can't get in. They have that two-factor authentication, and that number or that phrase changes constantly, maybe every 10 seconds, so that it's not possible to get access to. So a lot of places are using that, and if you don't have a vendor that uses two-factor authentication, ask them, what can we do to get there, and definitely start to implement it in your company. Microsoft even is using it quite a bit, and so it's something that we're seeing more and more, and we're recommending more and more. We use it internally just because we want to protect passwords, we want to protect client data, and it can be shut down very quickly if needed. So good things to keep in mind from the password side of things. Another thing is just with passwords, remember that sticky notes are horrible, right? Lock your office. and just see and look around. Are there any passwords that are blatantly obvious, right? Maybe people don't have passwords, with a password on the front of it, but it's sitting there on their computer and it's attached to their monitor, or as I put here, check under a keyboard, right? We've had clients put them underneath a keyboard. That's not secure. And so we need to really have a joint effort to make sure we raise the security level. So keep that in mind. Walk the office and make sure that it's just blatantly obvious to everyone that we shouldn't be doing this. Point number 2 is procedures, right? So we've dealt with the human element. Now we need to really reinforce some positive thinking for cybersecurity, and those are with procedures. So don't give the bad guys a head start, put here. I just searched for controller and email address in Google, right? And so this is what came up, right? I think this is the Rochester Institute of Technology. If I was their IT, I would tell them to take these 2 people down off the website immediately. Is this your website? What you're doing here is you're giving half of the information immediately out to folks who control your banking and data, especially your banking, right? The controller, they can now go out there and target Lynn and Kevin with names and with specific emails. So for instance, would your users be able to determine if the Rochester Institute of Technology was your client and they got an email from Lynn Kelly, but the email was lynn.kelly@riit.edu, and it looked exactly like a normal email, but was a phishing attempt to change banking information, would they recognize that? I can tell you 9 times out of 10, they probably won't, initially. So it's something that we see over and over again. Again, these cyber criminals have tons of money. They go out and purchase a domain, riit.edu, and then they send out an email because they know Lynn Kelly is the controller. And so they set up an account that looks like it's from Lynn Kelly. And so they'll start sending out information, or maybe vice versa, right? Maybe they have the president's information and they're sending it to Lynn Kelly with a very similar email address to say, change, this remittance to such and such. So you have to train your users to spot these things very quickly and make sure that you have procedures in place to guard against those things. So here's a real life. I'm going to give you 2 real life examples of what we've seen at TAZ Networks, so that you know that this isn't just us just kind of saying, hey, this happens. And these are accounts that are medium-sized businesses that could lose essentially millions of dollars very quickly if they were not very careful about it. So, do you have procedures in place that when money is involved, you have a procedure or a rule in place that a voice contact has to be made? Because that's the quickest way for you to get away from these things. So here's what can happen. For instance, back in 2015, we saw an email from looked exactly like the boss's name in the boss's email, right? The president of the company. And they sent it to who they thought was the controller. Well, it actually happened to be a former employee. They had a new controller in place. So that gave us a tip right away, right? But the reply to was not the boss's email. And if you're not real specific and you don't start looking at those things, because we're using everything in an electronic world, you will hit reply, it'll go to a different address, and now here the cyber criminal has a lot of information. And so it was just a very short, simple message that looks like it was sent from an iPhone. It says, how's your day? I need to initiate a wire transfer for me. Please let me know when you get this so I can send you the wire instruction. People have been caught over and over and over with this. And maybe it's something that's been done. Instead of picking up the phone and saying, hey, Tom, did this, is this real? Well, definitely that would avoid that immediately. So do you have a procedure in place? Now, we use banking because that's the biggest hitter, but it could be other things, right? Something different that you have. Keep that in mind, right? Another item, maybe not banking, but maybe it's a procedure or policy in place that would affect your clients or would give them data. If the same thing was put here, send me the client folder file for the medical information of such and such, would they know, hey, no, I need to look at this a little bit closer. That's not our policy, right? And so that also means that the owner or the boss, the person in charge, needs to follow those procedures as well, right, and be accountable for them. Here's another one, another real life example, and this actually happened just this week. We had a call with a company that was on, and very interesting that this was a very targeted email. So a cyber criminal had the controller's name, had the controller's email address. They created a domain that had one additional character in it, another I in the .com address. So very closely related. It was hard to tell, right? But then they also had letterhead. And they put this in the body of the letterhead and sent it to their client saying, effective January 15th, we're changing our remit address for customer payments. Now, this would have caused tens of thousands of dollars in data loss, right, or in money loss, frankly. And so, you see this right away. It looks very close. And they got all the way to the point of filling out, the client responded and said, fill out this paperwork. They filled it out. They sent it back with wrong signatures, but they had everything they needed from the right perspective. It just wasn't legit at all. And then they started to fill this out. And on the last point, the client said, I better pick up the phone and just verify this. And they did, and they found out that this was totally back and forth, and our client had no idea that this was happening. So it looked all very legit, but then you start reading this, and you look and realize, well, this is a Hong Kong bank, right? Why would my client change to a Hong Kong bank? And so those are the types of things that do your clients or those that you get receipts from know that this is not acceptable, right? If someone asks to change a bank information or to change your remit to, instead of sending to somewhere in Michigan, they want you to send to a P.O. box, you need to double check that and make sure that it's legitimate. So amazing, and this was just one thing that happened just very recently. So put a procedure in place. Now what we're seeing is that most cybersecurity procedures and spending in the future will come from regulations. And there is no question that as we get more regulated in our industries, you're going to see more spending on cybersecurity. Our recommendation is to make sure that you put it into your budget for the upcoming years for some type of cybersecurity spending. If you're under HIPAA or FINRA, NIST, or PCI, or any of these others that we've got listed here, you're going to see more regulations coming from the federal government here in the upcoming months and years to come. And so be prepared and start now. Get an idea of what that means for your specific industry by maybe getting involved with a local group or at your industry events. When you go out to those events, hopefully they have some type of information that shows what the government is bringing down. And if we're your client or if we're your IT provider, then definitely bring that to us, and we're happy to work with you to make sure that you match all of those regulations that are coming out. A lot that are coming down, and some are basically off of the NIST standard there, the NIST standard, but some are very specific, and so we have to look at each individually. And that is not, it's not an easy thing. It is something that, as we know, government red tape, it takes a lot of time and effort to go through those and look at that and see, what does the government really mean here? What does it not mean? And what are we doing to protect ourselves? If we were held accountable, could we respond in an appropriate way? So definitely something to keep in mind for as we move forward with cybersecurity procedures. Another thing that we want to keep in mind is, do you have a computer or a security acceptable use policy? For instance, in that security acceptable use policy, does it state to not log into banking sites from Starbucks, right, on a public wireless network? Do you require use of a VPN? And we put here SSL VPN, which is a secure socket layer. It's 256-bit encrypted. We don't want to get into the weeds of the technical side of things, but it essentially means that we just put a wrapper around any information you send to the home network so that it can't be decrypted. Do you require that? If anyone from outside your company or outside your building accesses the company network, is that a requirement? It should be. And so you need to make sure that some of these computer acceptable use policy statements are in there. Feel free to ask us for our acceptable use statement. We can send that to you and make sure that you have one on staff. And then the natural question is, reward those who follow it. If someone really follows security, is concerned about security, let them know that. Reward them however you reward your employees. But you got to come down and punish those who do not. If you find out about something, obviously you're not going to put them in the locks as we got here, but it's something that you just want to talk to them about. Sit them down, write them up, tell them that this means company data and company money, and we can't have that happen. And so it's something that's very important for all of us to make sure that we're doing. So have that acceptable use policy. Well, another thing is updates, right? Yeah, I hate updates too. I hate Windows updates just like everybody else. So just keep in mind that we have to have them, right? When we do onboarding of clients, and we've gotten better with updates as we've gone along, we ask the client for a specific time and date, to put those policies in place so that Windows and third-party applications are installed automatically. A lot of times, and even recently, Windows and Windows 10 won't even listen to us. Microsoft has gotten to the point, much like Apple did before them, that they tell you there's an update. And at some point, your applications are not going to run until you update. It's just the world that we live in now. And so we have to kind of turn that around from saying we hate Windows updates to saying, hey, they're critical. We have to have these. And we have to make sure that we get updates installed. Because really, it's just code, right? It's re-engineering of code that makes use acceptable. We live in a technology world. These third-party applications and Windows have issues. And, if you think that Apple or Linux or something is better, no. I mean, everybody has issues, right? Maybe it's just not as widely publicized with everybody else. So just keep that in mind, that we want to make sure that we're compliant, and we tell everyone, hey, you need to leave your computer on at this time. It can be locked, that's fine, but know that we're going to install an update because it needs to get out there and be important. So real important to do in your procedures, make sure that folks know where and when your updates get installed. If you have any questions on that, feel free to ask us, and we're happy to help on that. So I've hit the first two things. Let me just break in here and ask Heather. Heather, we have any questions so far?
Not at this time. Kevin would like a copy of our acceptable use policy, so we'll get that out to you later today.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate that. All right, so let's go on to point number 3, technologies. So this is the place where we put the firewall, right? But I put it's not your grandfather's firewall, right? Some days I wish it was, but it's different. We're in a different world now than we used to be. And so, a lot of simple firewalls just don't work anymore. They're not security conscious. And so we go into a lot of places where we take over, and we understand the IT, and folks have a little bit of maybe a home router or firewall. And I would say even at home now, I've beefed up my home system, not because I'm an IT guy, but because I don't want to get hacked at home either, right? So something for all of us to think about. We've moved TAZ Networks to including a firewall, or having our folks have a contract for a managed firewall. It was just easier. It's almost like leasing a phone. You can think of it that way, right? We like the newest iPhone or Samsung or whatever you have. And so you may pay a monthly fee on that. 24 months, you get a new one, you pay the fee on it. The firewall is the same situation, right? We have 3-year upgrades on our managed firewalls from SonicWall, but they include all these additional features now, and they're really services. We can no longer think of a firewall as just a box that sits in a corner. It is an internet-connected device that needs monitoring and updating, just like a computer at all times. So threats are evolving, right? You hear the term zero-day threat. Well, that means that your firewall needs to be updated, on a daily, if not hourly basis, to scan for those threats. So they can scan items, and we use SonicWall, but obviously there are others out there. But you need to scan items as they go through the network with new signatures, right? So I have my signature. I can sign a check with my signature. It's different than Heather's signature, right? The same is true of viruses. They look like one type. Another virus looks like another type. But until you know what that signature looks like, you don't know what to look for. And that's where this new technology from SonicWall called Capture is very effective. It sandboxes new items before they hit your network. So if it sees something that just suddenly appears in the internet, it will actually put it in a sandbox, right? Remember the sandbox when we were kids where it was out in the corner, right? And was away from everything. Well, here is the same with technology, right? It sandboxes and says, we're going to hold on to this until we legitimately look into it. And SonicWall has a cloud capture product where they look at all these things from the internet and they say, yeah, this is good or it's not good. And they'll come back and then authorize it or say, no, that is a bad signature. There's a new variation of this problem out there. and they will blacklist it and put it off to the side. So it protects you, and it continually protects you. And then these new managed firewalls have content filtering, the antivirus, the anti-spyware, the intrusion detection on board. So definitely something where it is evolving, and we have to keep that in mind to make sure that we are on top of it. And so it's not just a box, it is a evolving firewall that we pay a service for. In addition, antivirus isn't just antivirus anymore. We have standardized on WebRoot because it really goes to the heart of cybersecurity now. There are so many more things than just antivirus now when you click on something in a browser, right? Chrome or Internet Explorer, Firefox. Does it take you to a good website or a bad website? Right? The old antiviruses never did that. But now the new ones do. They're monitoring for that. Since we've switched to WebRoot, we have seen our crypto viruses that were attacking our networks go down considerably. I think we've only had one since we've enabled WebRoot. And that was just because of user error, right? Where they weren't trained. And they opened up something that they shouldn't have. So it really protects your employees much better than it did before. And this is something that we're continually looking at to make sure that we provide in our contracts antivirus and firewalls and things that are up to date and doing the job, because you're one business, but we're taking care of 50. And so we have to make sure that if we see something that's duplicated several times, we take a step back and say, hey, what's going on here? The one thing we found very beneficial with WebRoot is that, you would always hear, keep your antivirus updated, keep it updated. Well, that's why we moved to WebRoot. There's no update engine with WebRoot. It's cloud-based for immediate protection. So you always have the most and latest and greatest definitions of what is needed out there. So whatever you use, if you don't use WebRoot, you want to make sure that it's updated. And we would say every hour, make sure at a minimum, if you don't use a cloud-based system, use something that is updated every hour, because these zero-day effects and exploits are getting worse as time goes by. So keep that in mind. Another thing that we're starting to see too is single sign-on cloud services. So Okta is a relatively new product out there that a lot of folks have thought and are starting to use, or some type of similar service to them. With so many interconnected cloud services, single sign-on and identity becomes very important. And so obviously you have to trust a provider like Okta. You have to make sure that they're authorized and doing their own security clearances, because they have kind of like the baskets of your passwords. But if they do it the right way, no one can hack those, and they can't see them themselves because of the way it's set up and the way it's stored. You are the only one that can see those passwords. So, with so many interconnected cloud services, identity management has become very prominent, right? He who holds your identity is very, very prominent, very important. And you're seeing Microsoft, even with Office 365, essentially wrap everything around that product for identity management. It used to be we would sign on to the server, right? And that was our identity management. For most folks, that's changing to where we're signing on to Office 365, and then that authorizes everything around it. And I can tell you that Microsoft is probably one of the if not one of the most secure companies in the world. They spend billions of dollars. We, as small businesses, you and I, we just can't compete with those things. That is what they do all day, every day for a lot of their folks. And so it's very important to trust them. And they know it. And they know it. So they keep that in mind. Another thing that if you haven't done it in Windows 10 is BitLocker Encryption. Now, what is that? Well, it's time to encrypt hard drives as a standard, right? It's time to make it your standard. A BitLocker is a data protection feature that integrates with Windows and addresses threats of data theft, a lost PC, a stolen PC, an inappropriate decommissioned PC, that a bad guy can't just grab your laptop from the taxi that you left it in, take out the hard drive, put it into his computer, and read all your contents. You don't want that to happen. So if you do not have BitLocker encryption enabled, we highly recommend starting immediately with that technology, making it a procedure or policy for your security use, and then making sure that your IT provider, or us, if we're that IT provider, is doing that and having it installed for every machine that you've got out there. It doesn't take much to set that up, and so it's definitely an additional security protocol. You'll also find that insurance helps as well. Your insurance policies and premiums, if you mention that you are encrypted with your devices, they might give you a insurance, maybe an errors and omissions break on that too as well, if you have that type of security policy, because you've got encryption enabled on your machines. So definitely something to keep in mind. So just to review here, we'll wrap it up. I want to keep respectful of your time and answer any questions. But remember, it's a three-pronged attack, not just a firewall, right? And think of the firewall as maybe the lock, right? We can't have just one lock, right? Here, the bike's gone, right? They didn't attach to the right piece, right? And so if you take that away, then that's a fail. And so we have to have a three-pronged attack with our cybersecurity. You want to make sure that your humans are involved, right? It's a human thing, and that's the number one issue that we see. We're humans, we're imperfect, and it's just one of those things where we need to be security conscious to start. And our procedures and technologies, do they match what we need to do to be secure, to have cybersecurity? If we do, then definitely we're in a good position as a company. Is everything going to be 100% foolproof? No, and I don't think you can get any IT person to ever say that, because we're only as good as the software and the computers that we use. But we're going to sure dang try and make sure that we try our best to protect you in the best way that you need to. So we appreciate you joining us today. We'll make sure that if you have a question, put it in the messages now. We'll have Heather ask those for us. And look out, we're going to continue to do this in 2018. Heather did a great job in sending something out to get feedback from our clients, specifically for clients and prospects, as to what was on their minds. And we're going to try to do this as a continuing education track, just to add additional value to our clients, to make sure that they know things that are upcoming in the world. We might also do some training things. For instance, Office 365 training has been a requested item, and making sure that others understand that too. So look for your invitation soon. Pass it along to your employees, anyone that you'd like to have. We definitely would love to have them on board as well. So with that, let me ask Heather, any additional questions that we've got?
Not at this time. We've got thank yous from a couple people, and you're welcome. So if anyone knows on how the webinar went, you can email that to me. Just reply back to the invite I sent earlier. And that's all I have right now.
All right. Well, man, I know I didn't ask and answer everything, but if you have anything in the future, feel free to email us, let us know. Heather is really doing a great job in taking care of this for us and pushing the content out And so we appreciate that. If you have anything that you'd like to see in the future, let us know. We'd be happy to do that or see, if we can get it on our schedule as well. And we appreciate the time that you spent with us today. It means a lot to us, and we appreciate for those of you that are clients that you're definitely willing to trust us. Well, thanks a lot. Have a great day.